The Azure Promise. Eleanor Hayes, at 70, found a quiet comfort in the ritual of her afternoon. The sun, a benevolent orb in the clear Cape Cod sky, streamed through the large window of her modest living room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. On her lap, a worn leather-bound album lay open, filled not with paper prints, but with ancient slides. She held a magnifying glass to the tiny squares of captured light, each one a portal to a past that felt both exquisitely vivid and impossibly distant. Her husband Robert had passed 5 years prior, leaving a quiet void that no amount of reading or gardening could truly fill. She was a retired English teacher, a woman who had spent her life immersed in stories, but her own, she often felt, had an unfinished chapter, a missing page. Today, that missing page shimmered before her eyes, captured on a slide. It was a photograph of a man, his dark hair tousled by a gentle breeze, his eyes dark and intense, holding hers. He was smiling, a carefree, dazzling smile that still had the power to make her 70-year-old heart skip a beat. Javier Rodriguez, the name a whisper on her lips, tasted of sunshine and salt, of a summer love on a faraway island. The next slide showed him laughing, his head thrown back, the whitewashed walls of Santorini a stark contrast to his tanned skin. Another, of his hands, strong and graceful, holding a camera. And then one she had taken of him, silhouetted against a brilliant cerulean sky, the sea stretching endlessly behind him. Her gaze lingered on a particular photo. Javier standing on a cliff edge, arms wide, as if embracing the vastness. He turned to her then, his voice a low rumble, filled with a youthful intensity. "We will meet again, Ellie, when the blue of the sky is at its deepest. That will be our azure promise." She remembered those words, every syllable etched into her memory, a promise whispered under a sky so intensely blue it hurt. He'd kissed her then, a kiss filled with a longing that had promised forever, even in the face of an inevitable farewell. But forever hadn't come. Instead, an agonizing silence. A deep sigh escaped her lips. What if he had been the one? The question, decades old, still resonated, a phantom ache in her heart. She hadn't dared to ask it aloud for years, burying it beneath a lifetime of respectable choices, a loving marriage, a fulfilling career. But the slides, unearthed after so long, had brought it to the surface, raw and exposed. She felt a profound longing, not just for him, but for the answer, for a quiet understanding of what had truly happened. Summer, 1970. Eleanor Hayes, at 28, felt the thrill of adventure coursing through her veins. This was her first time traveling alone, her first escape from the predictable rhythm of small-town life in Massachusetts. She was an English teacher, ambitious and eager, but also a little naive, carrying a suitcase full of books and a heart full of unspoken dreams. Santorini, with its dazzling white villages clinging to volcanic cliffs and the deep, inviting blue of the Aegean Sea, was a world away from her sensible life. She was utterly enchanted, but a quiet loneliness, a subtle longing for shared experience, lingered at the edges of her awe. She spent her days exploring ancient ruins, sketching the iconic blue-domed churches, and writing in her journal in a small cafe in Fira. One sweltering afternoon, seeking refuge from the sun in a shaded alley, she stumbled upon a small art exhibition. It was a collection of photographs, startling in their raw beauty and vibrant energy. A man stood by the entrance, his dark eyes intense, his camera clutched in his hand. He had a natural, almost wild charisma that drew her in. He introduced himself as Javier Rodriguez, a photographer from Spain, on Santorini seeking inspiration, capturing the island's elusive soul. His English was accented, melodic, and he spoke with an infectious passion about light, shadow, and the stories hidden in every face. Ellie, usually reserved, found herself captivated. He asked if he could take her picture, charmed by her earnest enthusiasm and the way her eyes seemed to drink in the world. She agreed, feeling a flutter of excitement she hadn't experienced before. Days bled into weeks, a dizzying, sun-drenched dance of discovery. Their routine became a symphony of shared moments. Mornings began with long walks along the caldera, Javier pointing out the subtle shifts in light, Ellie writing down fragments of poetry inspired by the dramatic landscapes. Afternoons were spent exploring hidden coves, swimming in the impossibly blue waters, their laughter echoing against the cliffs. He would photograph her, sometimes playfully, sometimes with an intensity that made her blush. She, in turn, found herself sketching his profile, the curve of his jaw, the passion in his eyes. Evenings were the most magical. They'd share simple meals at a small, family-run taverna owned by a kind, knowing woman named Maria, whose eyes seemed to hold the ancient wisdom of the island. They'd eat fresh fish, drink local wine, and talk for hours under a canopy of stars. Javier spoke of his dreams, to open his own gallery, to capture the raw essence of human experience through his lens, to show the world its hidden beauty. Ellie, in turn, found herself confiding in him, sharing her deepest anxieties about her career, her quiet longing for something more than just a respectable life. He listened, truly listened, his gaze unwavering, making her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time. Their conversations weren't just talk. They were a meeting of souls. Ellie, usually so pragmatic, found herself swept away by his artistic fervor, his unshakable belief in the power of beauty. Javier, for his part, seemed captivated by her quiet intellect, her grounding honesty, and the unexpected fire she possessed beneath her reserved exterior. They fell in love deeply and without reservation, a dizzying, exhilarating freefall. It was a summer romance they both knew, a fleeting moment suspended in the timeless beauty of Santorini, but it felt like so much more. It felt like destiny. "I've never felt like this, Ellie," he'd whispered one night, holding her close as the famous Oya sunset painted the sky in impossible shades of orange and purple. "Like I found the missing piece of my soul." "Me too, Javier," she'd confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "It feels like I've been waiting for you my whole life." He promised her they would find a way to make it work, that their connection was too profound to be merely a summer fling. He spoke of visiting her in Massachusetts, of her coming to Spain. They planned a final sunset picnic on their favorite secluded spot, a cliff overlooking the endless azure, the day before her departure. But the next morning, Javier was gone. Ellie waited. She waited at their designated meeting spot, the sun beating down on her increasingly frantic heart. She waited at his small, rented studio. She waited at Maria's taverna, her voice trembling as she asked about him. "Maria, her face etched with concern, could offer no answers. Javier had simply vanished. No note, no message, no explanation. Ellie left him a desperate, tear-stained note at his studio, begging him to contact her, leaving her address and phone number in Massachusetts, pouring all her heartbreak and confusion onto the crumpled paper. She checked her hotel lobby for messages, but there was nothing. No word, nothing. Broken-hearted and utterly bewildered, Ellie left Santorini the next day. The island, once a paradise, now felt like a cruel mirage. She carried the agony of his unexplained absence, a gaping wound in her heart, a constant echo of his last promise, the azure promise that had dissolved into thin air. She left a part of herself on that island, a piece of her youthful, hopeful heart, shattered and unanswered. She returned to her sensible life, tried to mend, but the wound never truly healed, merely scarred over, a constant reminder of what could have been. 50 years later, the scars still ached. Eleanor Hayes, now a septuagenarian widow, still carried the ghost of Javier, a silent presence in the quiet corners of her mind. She had found love again, a good, steady love with Robert, built on shared values and mutual respect. She had raised a family, taught countless students, lived a fulfilling life. But the unanswered question of Javier, the sudden, unexplained departure, remained a persistent whisper in her soul. One ordinary Tuesday, a package arrived at her Cape Cod home, hand-addressed, with no return label, the postmark simply international. Curiosity, a rare spark in her quiet routine, flared to life. Inside, nestled amongst layers of tissue paper, was a beautifully bound hardcover book. Its cover was a deep, intense blue, reminiscent of the Aegean Sea. The title, embossed in silver, read, Santorini, Captured Light. Her heart skipped a beat. The author's name, printed beneath the title, was simply Javier. With trembling hands, she opened the book. The pages were filled with breathtaking photographs of Santorini. The whitewashed buildings, the vibrant bougainvillea, the iconic sunsets. And then, near the front, on the end paper, there it was, her own face, a candid photograph of her, young and radiant, her hair caught in the wind, a shy smile on her lips, taken by Javier all those decades ago. Beneath it, inscribed in bold, confident script that sent shivers down her spine. Azure Promise, J. A gasp escaped her lips. He remembered. He had remembered their promise. But why now? Why after all these years? The old wound, though scarred, ripped open anew, fresh and agonizing. The unanswered questions surged, demanding an explanation. Driven by an urgency she hadn't felt in decades, Eleanor began her search. The internet, a marvel that hadn't existed in her youth, became her most powerful tool. She typed Javier Rodriguez photographer into the search bar. Within minutes, a gallery website popped up. Rodriguez Fine Art Photography, Cape Cod. Cape Cod. He was here, in Massachusetts, a short drive away. Her hands shook as she navigated the website. There were recent photos of him, older now, his dark hair threaded with silver, but the intensity in his eyes was unmistakable. His artist's statement spoke of a lifelong pursuit of light and beauty, of a singular, enduring inspiration that had guided his work for 50 years. Her heart throbbed with a mixture of hope and dread. The gallery's address was in a small, picturesque coastal town, only an hour's drive from her home. Without a second thought, Eleanor grabbed her car keys. She had to know. She had to understand. The drive was a blur. The familiar coastal landscape of Cape Cod, usually a source of comfort, now felt charged with a surreal, almost dreamlike quality. She pulled up to a charming, converted old boathouse, its weathered cedar shingles a stark contrast to the gleaming white walls and large windows of the gallery inside. She pushed open the heavy wooden door, a faint chime announcing her arrival. The air inside was cool, filled with the scent of canvas and the quiet hum of reverence. The walls were adorned with stunning photographs, not just of Santorini, but of sun-drenched landscapes, vibrant cityscapes, and haunting portraits, all bearing Javier's distinctive style. Her gaze fell on the far wall. There, dominating the space, was an enormous, custom-built easel. On it, a vast, pristine white canvas, completely blank, untouched. A man emerged from a back room, his step a little slower than she remembered, but his presence still commanding. His hair was mostly silver now, pulled back in a neat ponytail. Lines of wisdom and perhaps some sadness etched around his eyes. He stopped, his gaze falling on Eleanor. His eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. "Ellie?" His voice, a little deeper, a little rougher with age, but unmistakably his. The world tilted on its axis. "Javier," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He rushed forward, his arms open. For a moment, they simply held each other, two old souls reunited by a half-century of unspoken questions, of shared memories and enduring love. The embrace was tentative at first and tightened, a silent acknowledgement of all that had passed, all that had been lost, and all that was now, miraculously, found. They sat on a worn leather couch in a quiet corner of the gallery. Javier's eyes, still as captivating as she remembered, searched hers. "Ellie, I never thought I'd see you again," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I searched for you, when I came back. But you were gone. No forwarding address. It was like you vanished." "You vanished, Javier," she countered, her voice trembling. "You never came to our last picnic. No word. Nothing." The old pain flared, still raw. He sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "Oh, Ellie, that day, the morning you were leaving, I got a call from Spain. My mother. She'd been in a terrible accident. She was dying. I had to leave immediately. There was no time. No phones in the village for international calls. No way to reach you. I rushed to the ferry, caught the next flight out of Athens." He paused, his eyes filled with a deep sorrow. "I wanted to leave you a note. I tried. I wrote one, a desperate apology. Left it with Maria at the taverna. I asked her to give it to you. I also had a gift for you, a small pendant I'd had made, but it broke on the way to the taverna, and I couldn't get it repaired in time." Eleanor felt a wave of dizzying relief. The note. Maria, the pieces clicked into place. A half-century of unanswered questions finally given their heartbreaking, logical answers. Maria, a kind soul, but perhaps forgetful, or perhaps there had been a misunderstanding. The broken pendant. It was so simple, so mundane, yet so profoundly impactful. "Maria never gave me a note," Ellie murmured, her voice filled with a mixture of shock and belated understanding. I left one for you, too. At your studio. My address, my number. You never saw it? Javier shook his head, his eyes clouding with regret. No, I came back a few months later, after my mother, after she passed. I went straight to the studio. It was empty. The landlord had already cleared it out. I thought you'd forgotten me, that it was just a fleeting summer dream for you. I kept the promise, though, the azure promise. I dedicated my life to capturing that light, that feeling, that deep blue of hope. He gestured to the blank canvas. That's what this is for. I've always wanted to create the ultimate piece, a culmination of my life's work, inspired by you. But I couldn't. It felt unfinished. Ellie's eyes welled up. It was unfinished, Javier, until now. They spent the rest of the day talking, pouring out 50 years of lived lives, of quiet joys and enduring sorrows. She spoke of Robert, her good husband, of her children, of her fulfilling career as a teacher. He spoke of his travels, his struggles, his success as a photographer, always chasing the perfect light, always searching for a particular shade of blue in the eyes of strangers, a shade that reminded him of her. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the Cape Cod sky in hues of orange and deep purple, not unlike the Santorini sunsets they had once shared, Javier led her to the blank canvas. He picked up a brush, a long unused tool in his hand. "Do you mind?" he asked, his eyes filled with a new, vibrant spark. Eleanor smiled, tears silently tracing paths down her wrinkled cheeks. "Please." "Paint." He began to work, his movements slow at first, then gaining confidence. He mixed colors, the first strokes a deep, vibrant blue, the color of the Aegean at its deepest, the color of an unforgettable promise. He painted, not a realistic portrait, but an abstract representation of light and memory, of two souls intertwined across time and distance, of a promise finally fulfilled. Weeks later, a letter arrived for Javier at the gallery, a thick white notebook, aged envelope with a Greek stamp. It was from Maria. Inside was Eleanor's note, the one she had left for Javier all those years ago, carefully preserved. Maria, old and frail, had found it while cleaning out her taverna, a belated impulse to send it to the man who had loved the young American teacher so deeply. The note arrived just as Javier was adding the final strokes to his painting, a grand ethereal work he titled Azure Reverie. A culmination of a lifetime of longing and artistic pursuit. It was a final, poignant confirmation of their intertwined destiny, a serendipitous echo from the past. Eleanor and Javier, two elderly souls, now spent their days together, walking the beaches of Cape Cod, sharing stories, laughter, and the quiet comfort of a love rekindled. They didn't try to reclaim the youthful passion of Santorini. That was a beautiful memory, a precious relic of a different time. Instead, they built something new, something deeper, a love forged in shared understanding, in the quiet wisdom of age, and in the profound gratitude for a second chance. They visited Santorini again, years later, their hands clasped as they watched the sunset over the caldera, the sky an impossibly deep blue. This time, there was no fear of departure, no unanswered questions, only the quiet joy of a promise, spoken decades ago under an azure sky, finally, beautifully fulfilled. Their story became a testament to the enduring power of first loves, the unexpected paths of destiny, and the beautiful, patient way that true connections can, sometimes, truly wait. It was a love that proved some promises, once whispered, are eternal.